I rise today because our states, cities, and tribes are in trouble and they desperately need our help. State, local, and tribal governments are on the front lines in this fight against the coronavirus. We've seen local leaders in each of our states step up during this difficult time to do what is necessary to mitigate the spread of this virus, to protect the health and well-being of their residents, and to prevent the critical industries and institutions from failing. Their goal is the same as ours, to protect the lives and livelihoods of the people that they represent. I know this to be true in Nevada, where dedicated heroes are working tirelessly to combat the COVID-19 pandemic in every corner of the Silver State. However, this proactive and necessary response has not come without a cost. In addition to the coronavirus, Nevada must also deal with an alarming budget shortfall, exacerbated by a struggling economy that relies on tourism and a massive drop in tax revenue. Before this crisis began, Nevada had not mismanaged its state's finances. The state had a record low unemployment rate of 3.6%, and we had a rainy day fund for emergencies. But we have needed to use hundreds of millions of dollars from that rainy day fund in order to try to address our budget shortfall. Nevada has a tough road ahead and difficult choices to make. And Nevada is not alone. Many states across the country are identical. They're in similar situations. Red and blue states are facing this very challenge due to no fault of their own. Cities and towns, they're struggling to contain the health and fiscal impacts of this pandemic. During a special session of the Nevada State Legislature, lawmakers overwhelmingly approved a resolution asking Congress and the Trump administration for funding for state, local, and tribal governments to help offset an expected $1.2 billion budget shortfall caused by this pandemic. And they need the flexibility to spend it based on local needs. Nevada's Governor Steve Sisolak offered a stern warning, one that applies to the whole nation. Without additional federal support for state and local funding, states will be, and I quote, forced to make impossible decisions regarding funding critical public health, education, and more, unquote. Without additional state and local funding from Congress, our state's budget shortfall will make it overwhelmingly difficult to provide health care to everyone who needs it, to fund our local school systems, pay our first responders, and it would leave countless Nevadans in distress who rely on public programs. The CARES Act established a coronavirus relief fund to support states, tribes, and large local governments. And in Nevada, that funding has helped, and has helped to provide support for Medicare providers that allowed continued health care for our seniors and treatment for those high-risk COVID-19 patients. It's provided enhanced testing and contact tracing in our communities. It's provided for child care programs used by essential workers. It's provided home-delivered meals, home health care, and support for families and their caregivers. It's provided PPE and critical supplies like gloves and masks and sanitizers. Does any of this sound unnecessary to you? This crisis isn't over, and those needs are still here. I've spoken to mayors and county commissioners across Nevada, and they are worried. They must make it through to the other side of this crisis. They want to protect, they want to secure their communities. They're counting on us, they're counting on Congress to have their backs in this effort. Congress must ensure that we support and that all the support reaches all Americans in every kind of community. One of the CARES Act Relief Fund shortcomings was it provided no direct support to cities and localities with populations under 500,000. For a state like Nevada, that means, except for Las Vegas, every other city in the Silver State was excluded from direct funding from the federal government. That's why in April, Senator Cortez Masto and I joined Senator Heinrich in introducing the Coronavirus Community Relief Act, legislation that would provide $250 billion in new stabilization funds directly to cities and counties with populations under 500,000. We know state and local leaders are the ones best equipped to respond to their community's unique needs, and they are desperate. They desperately need the resources to do this. Unfortunately, Leader McConnell has refused to allow the Senate to take up the HEROES Act, legislation passed by the House that provides continued support for state, local, and tribal governments, including those cities and counties with under 500,000 residents, recognizing that the pandemic continues to damage our communities and that this recovery will take time. The HEROES Act would allow states to pay for frontline healthcare workers, first responders, teachers, other workers, and continue to provide those essential services to all of our residents. The House passed the HEROES Act over 80 days ago. 80 days ago. And the Majority Leader's own proposed legislation, the HEALS Act, does absolutely nothing to address the critical issue of state and local funding. Without action, states across the nation will face consequences that could have devastating impact on countless lives. History will judge the way we treated each other during this pandemic. Each of us in the United States Senate is in a position to do something, just something. And I implore my colleagues to consider the lives of their constituents, to really pay attention, to really hear what is happening in their communities and in communities across this nation, in town after town, in city after city. And I want them to remember that we are all in this together. Thank you. I yield back my time. Actually, I yield my time to the great senator from the state of Nevada, my senior senator, Catherine Cortez Masto.